he asked in a quiet, suggestive voice. I clenched my teeth and looked away from him, staring out the window of his study. He cleared his throat softly, but I fucking refused to meet his gaze.
I know you won't talk to me about it, Edward.
He sighed as I began picking at the leather seat harder, really fucking uncomfortable even discussing about it.
Maybe it's because of what happened to her?
He hedged. I grimaced at his mention and clenched my teeth harder, still refusing to meet his gaze as I picked the leather chair loudly with my fingers.
You can talk to her about the fire, can't you?
He whispered in a coaxing voice. I immediately seized my fingers on the leather, darting my eyes to his with a tight nod, and fucking praying my confirmation would get him off my back about it. His grave expression slowly transformed into a small smile, as he leaned back in his seat, and continued squeezing the stress ball.
Then something tells me that you will both be a great benefit to each other,
he stated, as he gazed at me with the same expression of pride he had worn in the gym.
Bella's point of view. I walked in the door with Esme feeling ridiculously elated despite the rather crappy day I was having. Of course, when Edward Cullen tells you that he's in love with you and that he's your boyfriend, it kind of tends to have that effect. Ever since the car ride home with Esme, I had been anticipating her question. She wanted to know what he was to me, and in an effort to give her a really big chunk of my honesty, where the whole event was concerned, I told her about what happened on the gym floor, using my condition to be evasive about her question. And of course, it worked. I also spent most of the way home apologizing profusely, and reassuring her that I was okay. I was fairly exhausted from the whole thing, really impatient for 10 to come so that I could go to bed with Edward. And my nose was aching rather badly, so tender that it hurt to even smile. Not that it could stop me. I followed Esme into the living room where Alice was waiting on the couch. When she saw me walk in, she smiled sweetly at me and I just felt really crappy for worrying everyone. I smiled back a little and made my way to sit beside her.
Alice dear?
Esme called from the doorway.
We'll need supplies,
she said, while glancing at her knowingly. Alice perked up and nodded, jumping off the couch and bouncing to the kitchen. Esme removed her jacket, glancing at me with a worried expression.
How are you feeling? Do you need some of the medicine yet?
She asked sweetly. I shook my head as I crossed my legs on the couch Indian style. They would just make me more tired. I'd wait until I was at Edward's for that. She nodded at me and began removing her shoes, getting comfortable. I felt like maybe they had some kind of tradition when it came to matters like these. Then I was wondering if they had ever had a matter quite like this. And as Alice came bouncing in the room with a tub of ice cream, 3 spoons, and a large blanket, spreading it out on the floor with a box of tissues present, my suspicions were confirmed. Once Esme had gotten comfortable, she sat on the blanket Indian style with Alice, glancing at me expectantly. I took in the scene with much amusement. They looked so serious, sitting on a blanket in the most cliché way. Like 2 girls about to get down to business, and then maybe give each other manicures afterwards. It was like the pretty and pink version of the Spanish Inquisition. With a martyred sigh, I lifted myself off the sofa and joined them on the blanket pane, folding my feet below me and glancing at the tub of Moose Strax ice cream in the center appreciatively. At least there was chocolate involved in the torture. Alice removed the lid and handed Esme and I both a spoon. I watched them both take 2 large spoonfuls before I grudgingly followed suit. I was wishing I could somehow split them up as I slid the spoon in my mouth and swallowed the ice cream in relief, as the cold soothed my sore throat. Esme wasted no time once her first spoonful was devoured.
Edward Cullen?
She asked without looking at me, dipping the spoon back into the tub. I grimaced, and then winced at the pain it caused. Her and Alice both ceased staring to look at me expectantly. I let out a deep sigh, leaning over and taking another spoonful. What about him? I rasped, deciding to be evasive until they could ask an actual question. Alice narrowed her eyes at me and stabbed her spoon into the tub, bringing out a large spoonful, and cramming it into her mouth, without breaking my gaze. I swallowed my bite thickly, deciding that maybe the pretty and pink version of the Spanish Inquisition was scarier than I had originally thought. As me cleared her throat and smiled at me.
How do you two know each other?
She asked sweetly. I glanced back and forth between her and Alice. It was like good cop bad cop. I decided to just lay it all out there. I wasn't ashamed. He's my boyfriend. I rasped matter-of-factly, dipping my spoon back in, and blushing furiously despite all my efforts not to. I put the spoon in my mouth slowly, watching as Elise's jaw dropped a bit. As me looked a little taken aback by my answer, but did a much better job hiding it.
Why haven't you ever mentioned him?
She asked softly, no longer paying attention to the ice cream. I grimaced again, shifting my gaze down to the blanket. We were just waiting for the right time. I shrugged uncomfortably, playing with the spoon in my hands between my fingertips. To get more comfortable, you know. I lied. And I hated lying, but it seemed like a good enough reason to me. When I chanced to glance back up at Esme, she nodded at me, smiling in something that looked a little too much like understanding and sympathy. I darted my eyes back to the comforter, wondering if that was why her and Dr. Cullen had been sneaking around as well.
That is just plain stupid,
Alice screeched, making me cringe away. I glanced up at her, and she looked so furious and hurt.
We're like sisters, Bella. You should be able to tell me anything.
The screeching continued, as Esme shushed her disapprovingly. My face fell when I realized she was more hurt than angry. I'm sorry, Al, it wasn't like that, honestly. I rasped apologetically. I didn't want you to be upset when I told you. She grew impossibly more furious as her face grew red.
Why on earth would I be upset?
She squeaked wide-eyed, throwing her hands in the air dramatically. I huffed, and leaned over the blanket to take another spoonful of ice cream from the tub. Because you basically despise Edward, I explained hoarsely, popping the spoon in my mouth, and letting the coldness soothe my throat. Then it was her turn to huff.
Well, of course I do. He's downright vile,
she said simply, like it was a fact. I narrowed my eyes at her painfully. Don't say that. You don't even know him. Not really. I defended Edward hoarsely. Because all of her dislikes were completely unfounded. Esme finally stepped in. I think she started, as she put her hands in between us as we glared at one another.
That we ought to give Edward's character a pass for a day? Considering what he did for Bella.
She raised her eyebrows at Alice. Elise's face fell, as she looked down repentantly in a way that nearly made me smile. She couldn't even touch that logic.
Right,
she said sullenly, glancing at me apologetically. I smiled back at her a little, happy that at least I had that one thing on my side. She arched her eyebrow at me.
How did you do that anyways?
She asked, tilting her head to the side curiously. I sighed, and looked down at the blanket. His touch is different. I shrugged one shoulder, hoping that I wouldn't have to delve into the whole electricity thing. I was fairly certain I looked crazy enough without adding things like that on top of it. Esme cleared her throat, gaining my attention as she reached back over the blanket to refill her spoon.
And how close are you?